Hi, welcome to SCI-Arc Channel. I'm Hernan Diaz Alonso, director of SCI-Arc. I'm here with Petrunia, founder and director of Archinect. This is part of a series that we want to broadcast in the channel, but also in the magazine, about entrepreneurs and people who come from architecture background education, but they choose a different path, sometimes very close to the field of architecture. In this case, some of them move away. And we're going to start first with a group of people that they are directly related to SCI-Arc, but the idea is that we keep expanding. Part of this has to do with an agenda that we're trying to push in SCI-Arc, but also I think across the field, in which there is what I will call an architectural way to understand the world that doesn't require to really be an architect or operate an architect in direct terms. So what is Archinect?
That is a very difficult question. And the answer to that, depending on who you ask, is usually very different. To many people, Archinect is the place to go to find a new architecture job. To other people, Archinect is the place to go to learn about what school to apply to. To other people, it's a place to read the editorial that we write that we feel is unique and original and offering content and stories that our audience is seeking. But it is a place that is intended from the beginning to bring together people in and outside of architecture to become more engaged in the industry and to become more familiar with what architects do.
You started and founded Archinect in '97 when you still were a student.
Yes.
And so I have a feeling that it came out of a desire, but almost like a game. Probably you didn't anticipate then that 20 years later this will be what it became, and this will become your way to operate in the world.
Yeah, I mean, in 1995, I don't think I would have seen it coming, but it was really the perfect storm of an opportunity that happened at that time. I grew up totally passionate about contemporary architecture since I was a young teenager in a fairly small city in Canada. And the only way that I had access to find out what's going on in the world of architecture was to literally get on my bike and ride to the university and visit the library. And it was unfair. I mean, I was completely detached from that world without putting that much effort into it. So then I started studying architecture. I was at the University of Oregon for a couple of years where I independently picked up web design skills back when Netscape first started introducing images into their browser. So I saw a lot of potential there, then moved on to studies at SCI-Arc, where I felt this new type of creative freedom that I hadn't felt prior to entering SCI-Arc. And it seemed like the perfect place to experiment with new media and with new tools. And with this new emerging medium of the internet arising and my increasing interest in learning how to develop and design for the internet, I put all those forces together and created a platform that would kind of break down these boundaries that have always held me back from becoming more connected to the contemporary world of architecture. And I was hoping that that's something that could greatly impact architecture in general and help out people like me that wanted to become engaged somehow without having to formally subscribe to that industry, either by studying at architecture school or becoming an architect themselves. So that was the impetus. When I was at SCI-Arc studying architecture, my goal from the beginning right up until the end was to become an architect, and I was at the school learning how to design spaces. But when I started putting together websites, I recognized there were a tremendous number of similarities between designing physical space and designing communication space and digital space, and the kind of spaces that would facilitate activities on a screen, on a connected network, that are very similar to the kind of activities that you facilitate in a built environment. I found that my experience at the school, what I was learning in the school, what I was practicing and experimenting with in an architectural way, was very easily transitioned into creating a presence in a world in this new medium.
Let me ask you something more specific about the growth from what I thought probably at the beginning. Again, it was born out of the desire of communicate, and maybe you did it, maybe you didn't see it from the beginning, and this will become potentially a business model. How this evolved from something that was kind of a work of love or passion into became a full-fledged business.
I was not at all interested in starting a business with Archinect. It was purely a passion project that I did in school. I then applied to, I worked on some of the first SCI-Arc websites. I got more experience and more tools under my belt through that experience. And actually the first business that I started right out of SCI-Arc was not Archinect at all. Archinect continued to be my own personal pet project on the side. The business that I started involved, I worked with 3 other recent graduates from the school, Clancy Pearson, Mark G, Will McNaughton. And we had this ambitious goal of designing everything because we were architects, and we had the combined skills to create good design for anybody. And without trying to turn it into a business, it ended up becoming a business on its own. And I really think that it's due to the fact that it was driven from the beginning with passion. And every decision that I made was not about how to monetize this. It was really about how to make the best thing that I wanted to make and how to realize the vision that I had from the beginning.
When Archinect became Archinect in terms of becoming your main focus and interest?
It was a transition that happened between 2004 and 2005. That's when I realized that my work for my clients was suffering because my love for what I was doing was clearly in Archinect. So I decided that I would just go with my gut instinct and shut that side of the business down and focus entirely on Archinect, because it's my belief that if you're doing something that you're passionate about, the only way that you can really achieve its full potential is if you just jump right in and put all of your energy into that.
Any entity that tried to deal with the notion of information, critique, and so on, they all build some sort of internal code about ethics, content, what we publish, what we don't, what we go after things. So how that start to take shape?
That's something that we've had to struggle with, because when I started Archinect back in the 90s, nothing existed out there. So we wanted to do it all. We wanted to provide every opportunity. We wanted to have a discussion forum to bring people in and talk about issues. We wanted to share work. We wanted to report about what's going on around the world. We wanted to open up a blogging platform to let people blog about their own things. But that's not a model that is easy to launch right now. If we tried to launch with that model that we did in 1999 now, I think it would be impossible, because these days people want something very specific. They want to go to a website or a blog, for example, to see very specific things, or they want to go to a discussion forum. They don't want sites that have everything together. So that's something that we're currently working on evolving our business model to diversify our brand into more highly specific channels.
How you start to build the criteria, what you choose to focus on it?
Generally, what we try to do is we really try to think about what it is our audience wants to get from us and how we can provide that for them. Right now, if you look at websites, you'll see that there's pretty consistent type of content that's being distributed. There's a lot of the same new projects that will get presented in very similar ways. There's a lot of content that's picked up through Facebook or Twitter. I would love to see more websites getting influence outside of the internet. I feel like the internet has now become what I felt the architecture industry was back in the 90s, which is very insular, and now the internet has become insular. It's like everybody's looking for inspiration among themselves. So we try to stay original, and we try to provide content that is different.
But there is something that is interesting to me about the notion of information and deformation and how those things start to operate. And this is something that you guys think about it or consider or is part of the conversation?
Everybody has their own voice, and we do want to have a place where people can feel like they can share their voice, and we encourage those voices to be shared rationally and mindfully.
I wonder in relation with the amount of articles and pieces that you guys put daily. What do you think is the time frame that you need for an editorial or a critique or whatever it is to settle in, and to what is the life cycle of discussions, of conversations right now?
I think journalism is in a very difficult place right now, and I don't think it's a great place that it's in. I think that the solution to making good journalism work is yet to be discovered. The problem is that I think a lot of publications have taken on the kind of BuzzFeed style of journalism, which the reality online is that advertising is directly proportional to how many people read your piece. And the reality is that you can post an article with 10 photos that you find on the internet of funny cats, and that's going to generate probably 100 times more money than a really well thought out theoretical architectural piece that somebody maybe spent 2 weeks doing. That's the reality. And how we can change that, a lot of people are trying to figure that out. We don't know. Maybe that type of journalism needs to feed into some other type of business model and not rely on page views. So that's probably the most realistic way of keeping the journalism industry healthy. Our content is segregated between original in-house pieces that we write that are exclusive to Archinect, and then we have kind of a news aggregation system where we point to stories that other people are doing, and we link to other stories, and then we provide an opportunity on Archinect to have our community get involved and post comments about that story. And then we also kind of summarize other related stories too. So we do have a news aggregation component and an original editorial component. The way that other sites that syndicate our content function is they provide zero distinction between that. If you were to subscribe to our RSS feed, you would just get everything together, regardless of the weight of each piece. So, and that's the way that a lot of people are accessing.
How many pieces you guys produce, and then how many get published? In other words, I mean, do you guys publish every piece that you did, or you do a selection? Say, okay, we thought that this would be interesting. It's not. We're not going to do it. Or is much more unfiltered and said we put pretty much everything out, and we leave kind of the community and the readers to do a selection?
We have a project management system that we use for our editorial, where we throw out ideas. Everybody on the editorial staff throws out ideas for stories throughout the day, and it's a lot. And then out of those story pitches, we end up using maybe 10 to 20% of those and moving ahead with writing something about it. It could either be a very quick short form piece or a longer form investigative article. And from the 10 to 20 that we pick out, I would say 90% gets published.
Where do you want to go the next 10 years? Where you want to work on it?
Rather than having a single website, as we have for all these years, that caters to the entire world of architects, we are recognizing that there is a lot of value in becoming more geo-specific to how we deliver the content, and how we can utilize the existing markets right there that are not associating our brand to their own country's needs. So we're starting out in London. We're hoping to have an official launch in the summer. And once that gets rolling, and once we've established a presence in London, and we're considering this a prototype, our next step is to go to Australia, which is a big market for the building industry.
And what is the model? You partner with locals, or is your own completely autonomous operation?
We have created a joint venture in London with another company that works within the architecture industry in a similar in a similar way, but very different way. So we're non-competitive, but we understand the business from the same perspective.
Jeff Kimnix, who a while ago he says, architects should get out of the business to try to convince people and start building audiences. Which it may sound like not much, but there is something really interesting about that, which is the idea of the construction of an audience. Which in a way I will say that's what you do on a regular basis. So, and I know that the data is not always perfect, but what do you think is the audience of Archinect? What is the size of the audience? How much of the audience goes beyond the confines of the profession? And do you see a change? You see that the audience start to get more diverse, more mixed, people who are outside the world of architecture as players and start to come around, or we're just replacing a model of isolation for another one, where it's more sophisticated, but it's a little bit bigger, but they still operate under the same limitations and problems that architecture historically has as a discipline to communicate with a larger audience.
It's interesting because in the beginning, when I was starting Archinect, I was also heavily involved in this this young kind of collective of web designers that were really pushing the boundaries with how to utilize this new web medium to explore new ways of communication. So when I started Archinect, I thought this is a perfect opportunity to bring these people in who are the brilliant designers and coders and introduce them, combine them with this architecture community that I'm starting with Archinect in an attempt to really break down these walls between industries and have inspiration between people outside of architecture within architecture and vice versa. Over the years, I've always felt that. I've always felt that there needs to be more of an interface between architecture and everyone else. But what we found is, our job board, which is the biggest job board for the architecture industry, it's kind of forced us to, rather than catering to as diverse of an audience as possible with architecture and other fields, we've now focused on the diversity of people within architecture. So we've kind of gone back to catering to an audience of architects, but that audience of architects is more inclusionary than it was in the beginning. I think it's critical that the work of architects starts having a bigger effect on the rest of the world, and architects should really stop working only within architecture and with other architects. I think architects have the skill and the intelligence and the experience to do a lot more than what they're doing right now. There are some architects that are just designed to draw, details, and other architects that are designed to re-envision a city. So I think it's unique to the individual, but I would like to see architecture have more respect as a creative, visionary industry.
Paul, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the SCI-Arc channel, and please come back to check on the series of entrepreneurs.